What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of HR Heretics. Today, we have the head of talent and head of people whiz, Adam Ward. What's up, man? Welcome to the show.
Hey, how are you? Thanks for having me.
So, unfortunately, Kelly's sick today, also known as she's playing hooky. Hope you feel better, Kelly, but we will run the show without you. So, I want to talk about what's going on in the market today. You are probably hiring more heads of talent and heads of people than just about anybody. So just give me a brief rundown. We're filming this on January 22nd, 2025. What's the state of the world today, Adam?
Yeah, well, I won't go into the world, but I'll go to a state like the talent world. I think it's very interesting right now because we're starting a new year and we have a backlog of delayed hiring in terms of heads of people and heads of talent that are starting to unlock. Balanced by a lot of these roles are still pocket listings. If you're familiar with the real estate term, pocket listing, meaning that house that never goes on the market, it's kind of sold through like a whisper network through your real estate agent. That's very similar to the market right now. So if you're a people or talent leader and thinking like, hey, I'm okay where I am, or maybe even unhappy where I am, but I want to pick my head up or put my toe in the water, it's quite a frustrating experience because normally you would typically go to, if you're a leader and exec, to some search firms. If you're maybe like mid-level, maybe look job postings, but really not a lot of that is happening on either side. Rather, CEOs or CHROs or hiring managers are going to like kind of their trusted network. It's like, hey, who do you know that might be great? Right. So that's how like this word is getting out and how a lot of these hires are being happening. So if you look at from an external standpoint, when you try to see the market, it's really hard to understand what's going out there. Because if you go to a search firm, hey, are you all busy? Like, yeah, we're busy, but they're not seeing all of the searches even collectively. There's a whole lot of roles being filled kind of on the side. For example, if you like looked on your LinkedIn 2 weeks ago in January and you're like, oh, I didn't know that person was looking and or that company was hiring a CPO, because that happened through a whisper network broker exchange type of situation.
Okay, so I agree with you. I'm seeing exactly the same thing. Why? Why is that happening? Why aren't companies posting roles on the website like they used to? And then, typically what used to happen in the past was we'd post a role, we'd try to ping a bunch of people over the course of 2 weeks. We would fail, and then I would call you and say, all right, Adam, help me solve this problem.
Yeah, I think there's three reasons. So one is supply demand. Both like the perception of like a lot of supply out there and the reality of supply. So the perception is there's a lot of supply of great talent out there. False. That's that's false, that there's a lot of amazing talent on the market ready to find next roles. True, a lot of supply, but maybe not a lot of great supply. And so there's that perception of like, hey, I don't need to do this because I can just go tap someone who is readily available. The second is, if you post it, historically before you would ask maybe internal recruiters or others on the team to help do it, but now you're getting inundated with a lot of poor quality supply that the team doesn't actually have time to be able to work their way through, leading into a pretty negative brand perception or candidate experience out there. And then the third is that there is this subset of people who don't want to put their hand up because they maybe are in a company, they are reasonably happy, but they wouldn't mind hearing about opportunities. And so they have been talking to their local network. So those bonds are true and there are some great connections out there, but there people are a little bit of PTSD of is the grass really greener? Maybe I should stay here, but I also don't want to miss out on things. But I also don't want to be exposed to my CEO that I might be open to new opportunities.
So I want to talk about what makes a good head of people and head of talent leader to a CEO. But you just mentioned this whisper network thing. And I think a lot of people who are listening to this right now are like, well, that's not fair. I'm not getting opportunities that way. And if you're one of those people, Adam, what is your advice to them to have better networks and to build these networks such that when these opportunities come up, they are in the know versus in the dark?
Yeah. Let's also just recognize hiring has never been fair. So to believe that egalitarian, is a misnomer to start. But there's a lot of things you can be doing to if you're in that moment or be prepared for that moment, which is thinking about people talk about this like board of advisors, or, the people
Yeah.
kind of keep up like, formal or informal mentors and advisors. But thinking about who are those people that you've just clicked with over the arc of your career, people who are just maybe have the same shared values as you, and you've just kind of really always clicked when you've talked, or you had like this 10-minute conversation with someone. It was like way pithier than a 45-minute conversation with someone else. We probably all can think about those people, but
Yeah.
even spending 15 or 20 minutes going back through and think about who are those people. Why that matters is, one, they're much more likely to help you because you did click with them. Two, they probably have shared values with you that they are going to be a decent proxy for you out there on the market of things that if they're like, oh, that sounds interesting, is also more likely to be interesting for you. Right. So you kind of want to build that long list of people. You might overlay that with like, hey, are they like relatively plugged into like what's happening in the market? Either because they just love networking and being aware, or maybe their job somewhat requires it. So you think about building that list of people that might have it. And then it's a somewhat fixed list because you're going to go back to them on a regular basis. Because my advice is this: once you have it, think about putting those 10 to 15, 20 people on a every 2 to 3 week, 4-week rotation where you're checking in with them.
Totally.
So there's an initial conversation that you have of like, hey, here's where I'm at. Here's my framework of what might be interesting to me. Here's like the 3 short, bullet points that you want to remember. I'd love to hear about opportunities you think that you hear about there that could be interesting, that might come your way. Would love to hear about them. But you don't stop there, right? Every 2 or 3 weeks, you're checking in with them on a no action update, which is like, hey, Nolan, great to catch up 3 weeks ago. Thanks so much for your time. Hey, as a reminder, here's the 3 things I'm looking for. And here's a couple conversations I've had or things that have looked interesting. Let me know if anything comes your way. What that does is it resets the lens through which like the next 36 hours that you interact with people, Slack groups, your email, whatever. Yeah. And you kind of reset the clock for them and, spread those 20 people out over different weeks, and you kind of work through those and continue to keep up to date with them. There's no action for them, right? And it's really easy for them to help you because they can literally copy and paste a blurb about you, those 3 bullet points, whatever. But sometimes there will be actions like, hey, Nolan, great to talk. Saw this opportunity, saw you're connected. If it feels right, if you're open to it, would love an intro to this person. Here's a copy paste thing that you could send to that person, and here's their email address.
Yeah. I was talking to a friend this morning about exactly this topic, and I feel like one of the things most people do really poorly is cold outbound. Like they're just bad at communicating that way. And so my view is like, instead of just sending like an ask all the time, just say like, what's up to people, or say like, congratulations when things happen. The example that I used the other day was, I saw this company who had built a new product. I know the CEO, they launched it on Twitter, and I was like, yo, like this is sick. Congrats. And I even think instead of like making a specific ask, just like putting yourself in front of them expands your surface area of luck. Like now all of a sudden that person's thinking of me because I said that. And so I think there's different types of touch points too, right, Adam? It's not just like, hey, like think of me for this job, because then you kind of get annoying. It's also just like, hey, saw you did this thing, like congratulations, or was thinking of you today, like hope you're killing it. Like just little things, like little human things like that go a long way.
Yeah. And you see it over my head, the book Give and Take from Adam Grant.
Totally.
You're a taker, like you're less likely to get help, right? People generally do want to help people, but when it feels authentic and it's relatively easy for them to do, they want to do. The last thing is like, you're also just being a good human by being excited for them, being interested, offering to help them too. A taker is like,
totally,
can you help me? A giver is like, hey, I need some help, but also how can I help you? Or, hey, I thought of this for you. Would this be interesting? And so just being a good person, as weird as that, and as trite as that sounds, actually is very helpful when you are in that time of need as well.
Totally. All right. So let's go back to this supply of good people and talent leaders.
Yeah.
In my mind, the only barometer of good actually comes from the CEO, and nothing else matters. Like what your peers think doesn't matter. Like what we want to be true doesn't matter. What really matters is what CEOs think good people and talent leaders have as their skill set. what are they telling you when they're opening up searches and they're talking to candidates about what they find as the qualities that they want in their next hire?
Yeah, I think there's two camps. There's one who they don't know what great looks like or what good is, and the second who think they do and have to go through like a long process to discover it. And so the first camp, maybe is like starting at the beginning, maybe even through pain. There's like, hey, I'm not sure what great looks like. Can you help us? And like, there's lots of ways I can talk through detail of like how we do that. Those that do, and like what our data has showed over time, or those that get to a point of view on what good looks like, what we've looked at over time is we often look at these like, think about as a 2x2, which would be like experiences and characteristics as your columns. And your rows might be must have and nice to have. So the upper right being the must have characteristics is honestly what matters most between good and great. The number one characteristic we've seen over 6+ years of doing these searches is some version of business driven, meaning they think about how the people or talent in the organization that is there or they need to get will help them drive business outcomes. And that's the lens through which they operate. They are like a business leader first who happens to run the people or talent function.
Yeah, like you hear this meme, right, in our community all the time, right, which is like, oh, I'm business driven. But what is like, how does it show up? Like, how does it actually show up on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah. Sometimes I think one way it shows up is being the person who's talking the CEO out of a people program or talking them out of a hire, right? Where the perception historically was the HR leader, the talent leader was selling me on a person, on a program, and it was kind of like a build type of thing, where all of a sudden you're like, how do we get all this infrastructure, all this people programming? Is it really driving? So a real business leader tactically might look at the OKRs for the quarter or half, and they are mapping back every people process or program or even person. Like, is this driving this forward or no? And they're willing to scale or cut that back because they know it's not in service of that outcome.
Or even miss their personal OKR because, I remember these OKRs we had at DoorDash, right? Which was like hire 25 engineers this quarter, right? And that's probably a bad OKR, but it's like everyone has it, right? And I think what you're saying, correct me if I'm wrong, is, I'm at 20 engineers. We have 3 weeks left, but we don't find the great candidates that are meeting our bar. And like the hiring team is feeling the pressure to like get to offer extend. And the talent leader is actually like, no, we will not compromise. I'd rather miss this goal than hire these people.
Yes. So 2 things I'll say about that. I just was off a call last week with a recruiting leader who was saying that they set their OKR and recruiting around quality, not number. Like it's move, like, so I see this moving with like more forward thinking companies, because this number is, you're just like, think about the headcount planning process in capacity. It's kind of an exercise in round numbers. We're not going to hire 121. We're going to hire 100 or 150. We choose these round numbers. So it's like, it's false precision. So then we put all this pressure around a falsely precise number and create all this activity when it's rarely just like a best guess at a moment in time, often months ago. So when you recognize for what it is, then you actually can focus on what really matters, which actually might be the quality coming in. So like, that's one thing. We do see this shift moving away from a number. The second thing is like, what gets measured gets done. So if the goal is just to hire 25 people and you're incentivized people, they're going to hire 25 people, but they may not be the right people. So just like, I think that setting those numbers can set to like the wrong set of behaviors that you're looking for is probably not the right OKR. And really, companies are setting hiring goals for recruiting teams or recruiters to make sure they're keeping the pedal down, right? They're keeping the momentum going forward. They're not. So I know at Facebook, they used to just set a number for us that they knew we couldn't hit, so we wouldn't stop. Like, they're like, what can you do? And you're like, oh, we can do 100. Like, great, the number's 200. Like, great, so here's the amount of resources. Like, no, we're not giving you more resources. We are just going to continue to push you, so we're not stopping. We know you're not going to hit it, but we have to set a number that will not slow down against.
You're exactly right. Like, that's why they do it. I actually think it has a perverse incentive when you do that, when you set these audacious goals, is like people run around and contort themselves to try and hit it. And really the contortion means we're lowering the bar and we're pushing people through. And so that's a great example of a business-driven talent leader is able to say, like, it's okay that we're going to miss, but we kept our bar high and we did not compromise our standards.
As long as we're defining like what that bar is and like what that looks like, that is the path I see the best people and talent leaders moving towards. They acknowledge the hiring plan, the goal, and they're obviously doing the right resourcing, but really they're focusing on is like the right business outcome, which is like the right people at the right time.
Hey everyone, we'll be right back in a moment after a word from our sponsors.
I must admit, I used to believe that AI didn't actually exist in recruiting or HR. That is until my friend Heather Doche, who leads talent at Signalfire, told me to check out Metaview. I got into the product and was like, wow, AI actually does exist in recruiting, and this product is sick. Metaview is the world's #1 AI scribe built specifically for recruiting. Their AI records and transcribes hiring conversations, like intakes, interviews, and debriefs, then provides perfectly summarized notes of everything that was discussed. I've seen firsthand how tough it can be to extract consistently high-quality data from candidate conversations. I've been in debriefs where interviewers told us about their feelings instead of what actually happened in the interview. And I've seen VPs and CEOs block hires because they didn't learn anything from skeleton scorecards. Metaview changes everything. With perfect notes from every conversation, your people can focus on creating a human connection with candidates, and they can save time on the busy work of cleaning up notes after every interview. But it's so much more than just a time saver, because perfect notes means perfect data. For every candidate and every pipeline, hiring teams can make confident, informed decisions, and talent leaders can finally take control of the interview process. Metaview covers all your compliance needs, works with all your existing tools, and takes less than 3 minutes to set up. Join talent leaders at organizations like Brex, Deal, HelloFresh, and Quora, and check out Metaview. Head over to metaview.ai/heretics to talk to one of Metaview's product experts. Tell them that me and Kelly sent you. Or you could just go to their website and get started for free. You'll be up, running, and AI-enabled in minutes.
All right, so going back to your matrix, so the top right corner, right, is must have skills and characteristics. Like, what else is in that box?
Yeah, it's often that they are like a systems thinker, like first principles, and you hear those terms a lot. So essentially they can break down a pretty big problem into actionable and operational steps, right? So if I'm a CEO and I'm looking around my table and I have my engineering leader, I have my sales leader, finance, marketing, they're all business leaders who are thinking about moving the business forward and are really good at taking a high level directive and breaking it down into an actionable plan. So think about a product roadmap, a sales calendar, like a pipeline report. Like, we have not maybe moved far enough along as people and talent leaders of thinking about how do we operationalize these things? Because we often think about, these are like, we're working with irrational units of humans and we can't like put that into a box. I think we can do better than we have historically of taking that objective and tying it to how our people in our talent, how we're going to drive that forward.
Yep, that makes sense. The other one I've heard recently is CEO whisperer.
Yeah, I don't think whisperer is the right word. I think sometimes you're a yeller, sometimes you're a coach, sometimes you're a coddler. I think whispering has the wrong connotation of puppeteering or in the corner, giving them the answers to the test. Yeah, maybe sometimes it is that, but I think that relationship between CEO and CHRO, head of people, is so unique and special because it can be a lonely position because you are often the only person sometimes that CEO can talk to about her leadership team, right? Sometimes there's whispering, sometimes there should be yelling, and sometimes like we need to hug it out, but like the right CPO knows what dials to be turning when, and based on what that CEO needs at that time. Here's a good example where we just did a search that was a backfill for their former head of people. And we asked like, hey, what didn't go right that last time? And that CEO was like, my head of people essentially reacted in the same way I did every time. So meaning if I was like calm, they were calm. If I was freaking out, they were freaking out. It's like, I need them to be the counterbalance to me. If I'm freaking out, they need to like be like, no, we got two hands on the wheel here. Or if I'm not freaking out, I should be, then like I need that too. And so often the complementary piece can be useful there versus someone who is too simpatico with them.
Yeah. And if you're a candidate, like that's actually a great question to ask, right? Most companies are not hiring for the first time. And if you are, it's a different set of questions. But like, what didn't go right with the last person is a great insight for you as you think about, is this a place I want to work?
Yep. Yeah. And also like what ultimately works in this role is like, are we values aligned, not just as a company together, but like your values as a CEO, me as a people person. How we apply those values might lead to like some level of friction. But if you're aligned on these like core values or first principles, you're going to be okay. But you got to ask the right questions to get to those. The CEO, it's the first question is probably not going to get there. It's just like a good interview. The better you are at tunneling, tell me more about that. Oh, like when we click in on that, then you're going to get down to the core a little bit.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess, on the other side of this is like, what are the qualities that define the people leader that's having trouble getting hired in today's market?
Yeah, I think they may be, on a spectrum from like operational excellence to spiritual leader. They're closer to the spiritual leader, more of the champion of the people. They are coming across more programmatically than operationally strong. There's a fear out there from CEOs that they're going to hire a head of people who's going to overbuild or over-architect their people function. And for some companies who are maybe in more of the startup land or growth stage, one of your few advantages against other companies is your ability to move quickly. And when you put in too much people layers, you're like throwing away one of the only, competitive advantages you have against some bigger competition that you're trying to take from. And so I think there's this fear in the back of mind of CEOs that, that they're going to slow down a bit as well.
All right, Adam, I want to talk about the polarity thing for a second. So you were telling me before we started taping that one of the ways you help calibrate a CEO and a broader team, which I think is really interesting because there's always like CEO has something in mind and then there's like the rest of the team. Talk about the polarities and talk about how you like bring this entire team together to be like, this is the actual profile we need to hire for. Yeah.
And what we learned being in-house before running these exec searches is where searches took too long when you are laundering alignment via candidates. So meaning some version of like, I'll know what good looks like when I see it, or hey, like let's bring in some calibration candidates and we'll use that to figure out what we're looking for. The problem with all that is like crazy and inherent bias that happens intentionally and unintentionally around what a good candidate looks like. So what we try to do before we look at any profiles is really get into the objective things that we're looking for and aligning the stakeholders on it. So if you think about kicking off a search and we think about some like characteristics, candidates are going to be on a spectrum of things. So it's neither a 1 or a 0 of, I used operational excellence for spiritual leader, but people are going to spike on a scale of 1 to 10. So what we do is we think about a particular role, and as we hear about like what matters and like what they're looking for in terms of this person building out the talent and culture and people for this company, we think about, okay, what are some of like the characteristics and what might be the trade-off on those? So we list those out. So it might be like 5 or 6. And then we do one-on-one meetings with all the important key, people who might give input or who might influence the success of this role. Maybe not all interviewers, but they might be people who are going to really have like a hand in this role. And we do in person, 1-to-1. We ask them to, if you think about the sliders, plot on this scale 1 to 10, where you think they need to fall against these two poles. The only illegal answer being 5. So they can't be dead center. They have to be, left or right of center. And of course, our technical stakeholders are often doing 0.5 or 0.25, they're getting very precise as they will. Remember scorecards, and they're doing the same thing here, and then what we do is we roll those up and we overlay all of those points on the spectrum and show them to the CEO or hiring manager and be like, hey, here's where we have gaps, right? And we need to close those gaps, not averaging them, but you as the hiring manager need to make a call on where you want this person to fall relative on these spectrums, and then communicate that back out to the stakeholders before we go to search, before we go to market on that. And so what's interesting about that is, one, almost all leadership teams think they're aligned going in, and they never are. The second is you surface some real undercurrent misalignments that just are showing up through this role, but are actually fundamental differences in the direction of the business or leadership or other things. So we often pull up these coaching moments or other team building moments that they need to go tackle, but it's just showing up in this scoping of a role.
That's super interesting. So you show it to the hiring manager. You don't show it to the whole team. And then you basically give the action item to the hiring manager to go get alignment.
Yeah. And we also rarely even show who said what, because that may not matter, right? Because they might even themselves put their own weightage behind that person. It may not matter unless there's something really important, there's one person out here consistently from the team, that might be something to go with your coach or someone else to go figure out. But it might be more topical than person related. And so hey, there's a misalignment between whether we think this person should be doing more of X or more of Y. Let's figure that out. If we're not sure, let me show you some example profiles of what X looks like. Let me show you some example profiles of what Y looks like to kind of test that and test the edges of the profile. Again, so we're not possibly missing out on a great early candidate because we didn't have our stuff together.
That's actually the next one I want to talk to you about. So
yeah, can I maybe say one more thing why this matters? This matters more for this role than any other role because this person is evaluating your company on 2 levels. One, is this a great place for me in my career? 2, does this leadership team work well together and know how to attract great talent? Right? And so they're getting signals personally and professionally and company-wide through the search. So having a better candidate experience and more structured one is actually help you attract and close better candidates.
It does seem like in today's market, a lot of exec teams and CEOs think, oh, there's just all this great supply, they're just all over the place. And they don't really care about the candidate experience. And I think candidate experience actually in today's world is a little bit of a fluffy term. When what you're saying is I am finding exactly right and true. It's the best people are typically already employed or have many opportunities to be employed. They need to be so many things have to go right. And the way I've been describing it to some of my friends is it's the devil where you currently work versus the devil you don't. And it feels riskier than ever to go and take one of these opportunities because of the bad behavior in the interview process and the bad behavior just generally of how these exec team operates.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And I think you're right. There are a lot of people who have a very small antenna up, for the right opportunity, but are otherwise perfectly happy and stable. And if you don't really show that you care about them and how they can impact the business, you're not going to even be able to activate them, let alone get them through the process. And so I actually think candidate experience in 2025 is going to come back. One, as a really important differentiator, and partly because fairly so, a lot of our other processes are going to be automated. But the most important, crucial moments, the moments that matter in a hiring process are still going to be very much human-centric.
Totally. I think it's going to look more like free agency in professional sports.
Yeah.
Every, if a tier 1 quarterback in the NFL gets to free agency, which they never do, they have their pick of the litter. And I think that's what CEOs and exec teams need to understand is that just because your job is open doesn't mean you've earned the right to hire the best person for it.
Yeah. And to be fair, over the last 3 years when overhiring happened, including in the people function, a lot of CEOs had some bad experiences. A lot of CEOs, heads of people had some bad experiences. There was like a lot of rush to hiring. Like, I need someone. Oh my gosh, like the market's moving fast. I got to grab someone. And that someone ended up not being the right one. And that, that changed and soured how they think about hiring this next role. So almost every hire at exec level is a reaction to the last hire, this like pendulum swing, and often like an over rotation to it, to where like you don't really need to get like someone who's not from HR at all because you have a negative experience, but maybe you need someone who's maybe more like, operationally minded or business minded. But we see these like pretty heavy reactions to the last person they hired. That was maybe not the best hire.
Yeah, it's just what humans do, right? It's like we just swing the pendulum like right the other way.
And Silicon Valley is the worst at this on many levels, but this is another way that we're not so great at these things.
Let's talk a bit about like these head of talent and head of people roles. So I think another narrative that exists right now is the role has expanded and there's a lot for the people leader to do. I guess like, how do you help a CEO understand like the what of like what this person is actually going to be doing versus like what the CEO is doing versus how they work in partnership together? And I guess like part two of that is then how do we go and assess for all of these skills? Like how are we actually like in an interview process understanding if somebody's good at those things?
Yeah, I think there's two ways that we think about this to like surface this is like what needs to get done. Like let's build a bucket of those things. And then CEO, like what are you uniquely positioned to do and should you be doing? And then like that narrows down that bucket. And so you have this original bucket that's maybe narrowed down based on what the CEO should or is uniquely positioned to doing. And then let's stack rank what matters most to you. And so maybe workplace or IT is at the bottom of that. And then we like to think about like what could someone else be an expert in that could be complementary to the head of people. So yeah, maybe we give them IT, but can they hire a right-hand person who like owns IT because that's such a specialty area versus what should they uniquely be owning and not insourcing to another person on their team, right? And so when you kind of do that exercise, it actually comes quite clear on what you're looking for. So once we kind of narrow that down, then we're like, okay, what are the experiences and characteristics that we think this person is going to need to have experiences wise to be successful and characteristics to be a great person for our company. And then we stack rank that. So stack ranking matters in a couple for reasons. So one, the experiences become like your sourcing plan, right? Experiences are things that you can visibly see on paper or quickly reference. Were they at a company who grew from 500 to 1,000? Have they been through an IPO? Have they seen our next stage of growth? Have they been in a SaaS company? These are all sourcing strategies. These aren't assessment criteria. These are just your external filters. And then your characteristics become your assessment process, right? And then the stack ranking helps you do two things. One is you should be screening for the most important characteristics as early as possible. So we're knocking out people, and helps you put weightage behind the feedback that you get. So what I see happens a lot is, we might, as you go through a hiring process, we often have recency bias of a negative, a no late in stage on a number 5 criteria versus number 1 knocks a candidate out. And we forget that they spiked on 1, 2, and 3, what we said objectively mattered most before we started talking to people. So I have to look for like reasons not to hire, not because like we have a high bar. It's like, oh, we're humans and we remember the last thing. The last thing we remember is kind of like a mixed feedback type of thing. So we pass. We're like, hey, but wait, they have the experiences we want in those 3 things that we really care. And we think we can coach 4 and 5 because we objectively said those matter less. Now you can change the criteria as you learn more and meet more candidates, but to put the wrong weightage behind them is why you miss out on some great talent sometimes.
That's a really good take on like, recency bias and how it creeps into the process, because you can get somebody aligned at the beginning of the process and they're like, yeah, this is the stack rank, this is what matters. And they start talking to people. And then all of a sudden it's like, we start looking for the unicorn candidate that's perfect at everything. And that's just like not the way the world works with talent. Everybody has strengths and everybody has gaps. And so, I talk to these CEOs all the time who are just like, they just want the laundry list of like, they've done all these things, plus like, they've seen the next stage, plus they've had it, and you just keep adding and adding and adding. And it's just like, it's never realistic.
Yeah. Our data shows that, you get 5 experiences and characteristics that must have. Everything after that adds an extra month to your search. So if you want to run a 6 to 9 month search, sure, have 9 criteria. But if you want to run an average exec search, which is like 2 to 3 months, no more than 5 on each side.
That's really interesting. Okay.
So it's an if then. Like I think CEOs double if this then that. Like those, like that kind of like structure typically resonates with them.
Yeah, and even if you don't have the data, I think it's a powerful way to get somebody aligned. Okay, so let's talk about the candidate side for a bit. So if I'm a candidate, what is the best way to interact with you as a search firm?
Yeah, I think having that, we talked about a little bit earlier, but having that like clear, crisp, concise framework is really helpful. Yeah, we've all probably tried to help friends who might be looking for something. Like, hey, like what might be exciting for you? You're like, hey, I'm actually pretty wide open. Like that's really hard for us as humans to think about through our mental network and Rolodex of like, oh, you should talk to this person, talk to this person. But when you have these really clear ideas of what you're looking for, it's much easier to help place them. The best recruiters out there, as you know, are excited to connect any candidate with any opportunity. 99% of them are not going to be the one they're representing, but they intrinsically love to see great people and great opportunities get connected together. And the easier you're able to tee that up for them, they're going to be helping you slot you into a bunch of opportunities that they even may not be working on. But if you're like, hey, I'm pretty wide open, they're going to try to force you into the 3 to 5 opportunities they personally are working on. They're going to try to force fit you and jam you in. And then all of a sudden you get there and you're like, you're having a conversation, like, maybe I should like this. Now you start to sacrifice your own criteria of what you're looking for. So just like we like to run structured hiring for clients, candidates should run like a structured search. Meaning, if you remember that 2x2 that we talked about of experiences and characteristics, for a candidate, it's tangibles and intangibles, right? Split by must-haves and nice-to-haves. Tangibles are a specific role or scope, location, in office, compensation, things that can be like seen on the surface. The intangibles are the culture of the company, what makes the CEO tick, all those other things that you're going to have to like get into a candidate process. So just like the experiences are your sourcing for a company, your tangibles are like how you're filtering, but you're going to have conversations to really get into some of the kind of the intangible things that really matter to you. So that doing that work and continually going back and refining it is a really good way. What I find candidates often do is use the jobs to figure out like, well, what's out there, right? Like
Totally.
what's out there, like using that as like a way to shape their search. But we just talked about, 75% of these roles are below the waterline of the iceberg in terms of opportunity. So you're better off thinking more objectively what might be exciting, getting that word out into your network and using the search firms to communicate that. You're going to have much better success with that approach.
Yeah. The other thing I'm hearing in that is like, you're not their therapist, right? Like this is where, because it is an interesting relationship, right? With the candidate and the search firm.
Yeah.
Right. Is like, it obviously like you probably go back years and like you and I go back like a decade. And so like, you actually kind of can be my therapist because we're homies.
Yeah.
But like, somebody who doesn't have that depth of relationship with you, right? And maybe somebody you're meeting with for the first time, like they have to do this work on their own with their own network. And then as you get deeper in the process, like maybe things change and that stuff is cool. But like, there is a level of homework people have to do for you to then be like, oh, wow, this is somebody I really want to place because I know exactly what they're optimized for. And they're going to make me as the exec recruiter look good when I do the introduction to the company, which is one of the things people don't talk about that really fucking matters.
Yeah. Yeah, it really does. And, I'm probably wired a little bit different. Like, I don't mind doing a little bit of therapy work with folks and like helping along the journey. I just love helping people figure that out for their career. And so, but it might take 2 or 3 calls. So maybe I'm not running the best business that way because maybe not as efficient, but I do like to help people that way. But the more they're able to work through those things and do that homework, the better position they're going to be. And yeah, I think chemists know that like recruiters are the ones who are pitching and sometimes not even pitching, but maybe telling the candidate, hey, I'm going to share the profile with the CEO, but they've already like decided they're not going to do that. You have to give them the reasons to be able to do that. You have to tee that up for them. So that your ability to like logically talk through your career, the reasons behind those transitions, and then quick pivot, looking forward, here's what I'd be excited about in a clear, crisp way. That's essentially like the exec recruiter playbook of what you're doing. Here's their experiences, here's their motivations, and here's why I'm excited about them. So you almost have to get the recruiter excited about you so they are representing you fairly and proactive and promisingly to that hiring manager.
Yep. I don't think I've ever talked to anybody about that. I think that's like a really good framework for people to think about it, which is like, ultimately Adam is going to be presenting my profile. And so I should be as like in control as possible. 1, for me, but 2, to make Adam look really good. Because if I make Adam look really good, then like he's more likely to present me to more companies and be at the top of his Rolodex when a new role opens up and he's thinking about me.
Yeah, and the best recruiters I think can, subconsciously or, behind the scenes are mapping like, oh, your style or characteristics are going to really match well, right? And so they need to go deep enough with a person to understand their motivations and like what makes them differently like good and great. And then tease out what is it unique about this company and this exec team that these characteristics are going to really kind of plug in well to them. And like, that's what really matches. Like, that's why many people might interview, but very few people are going to get to a final stage because you use that assessment process to get to that values alignment, that values match.
Yep. Okay. So then last thing for you is the nightmare situation happens. Right, which we've done all this work, Adam, and we feel like we've done it right. We place the candidate, and then 60 days later, you get the call from either the company or the candidate, and they're saying it's not working. What's like the main reasons it's not?
I think there's 2 categories of them. So one is like fundamental shift in the business, which is real and has happened a lot more the last 3 years than the previous 13 years, meaning the company isn't going to be growing at the rate they thought. Like they don't need that level of person, or literally fundamental shift of the business. Hey, we actually are going hard pivot and we are going this way. We need someone who's like a really deep X industry experience. So that happens not as often as the other, but it does happen. Like it's happening more frequently as we've been kind of going through this last few years. I think that the second one was where one of the 2 parties talked themselves into it. And often it's more of the candidate talked themselves into that opportunity. Like they probably had some like pretty good intuitions that this might not be right. But, there has been this like, hey, there aren't a lot of these jobs out there. I need to get back in there. I've been maybe on the sidelines doing fractional work or consulting. And like, I need to get something. And they sacrifice one or more really important things in their mind for the role. And it turns out even more than they thought is like a key part to that job. So meaning like, hey, number 1 or 2 on their intangibles was a leadership team that really values their talent in a demonstrated way. Like, hey, I didn't really see that in the process. Seems like they're really maybe cutting back on things. And then they get in there. So remember, like hiring managers are on their best behavior during the interview process. Candidates are on their best behavior during the interview process. So if you get like an intuition or an inkling of something, it's probably way worse because everyone's showing up a little bit better than maybe they even are behavior-wise. And so that kind of unravels pretty quickly for them.
Yeah, it's like a big, trust your gut. And then also if you sniff something, it is impendent upon you to go vet that thing.
Yeah.
And a lot of times people are just like, like I kind of a thing, but like, oh, you know what, like brush it off. And to your point, it's like, you're going to have to go live with that every day.
Yeah. Well, you can bet that CEO is back channeling you. Are you back channeling them? Right? Are you back channeling that exec team with investors, with people who used to work there? Like you should be doing as much, if not more due diligence on them that they are you. They're paying someone to do due diligence on you. You don't have anyone who's necessarily doing all the due diligence you should be doing on them.
That's gold. Adam, where can people find you?
I'm on LinkedIn. I'm at adam@gbdtalent.com. We also have a website, so you can find us there as well. But yeah, happy to connect with people. I also love this work. I'm super passionate about it and love to connect with great people and talent leaders.
You're the best, man. Thanks so much for spending the time.
Thanks for having me, guys.
HR Heretics is a podcast from Turpentine, the network behind Econ 102, Moment of Zen, and Turpentine VC. Subscribe, 5 stars, share it on Apple, YouTube, Spotify, anywhere you get your podcasts, all the things.